Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Trump warns Hamas will pay in hell if they reject Gaza plan, as leaders around the world welcome the proposal. Trump and Hegseth call an end to woke culture in the military in a surprise summit. And controversy on the cricket pitch as Pakistan's cricket board chairman accuses India's Modi of dragging war into sport after India's Asia Cup 2025 victory. Now, President Trump has warned Hamas they will pay in hell if they reject his Gaza peace plan. He's also said 3 to 4 days to respond to the plan that includes an end to the fighting, the return of Israeli hostages and the creation of an international board of peace to help run Gaza, which would include former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. Here's more of what Trump had to say a little earlier.
How long do you plan to give Hamas to respond to the ceasefire proposal you've laid out?
Well, we're going to do about 3 or 4 days. We'll see how it is. All of the Arab countries are signed up. The Muslim countries are all signed up. Israel's all signed up. We're just waiting for Hamas. And Hamas is either going to be doing it or not. And if it's not, it's going to be a very sad end.
And do you have a deadline, Mr. President? Is there room to negotiate, or is this a take it or leave it deal? Is there room to negotiate with Hamas, or is this a take it or leave it deal?
You know, with Hamas, we want very simple. We want the hostages back immediately, and we want some good behavior. And, you know, it's pretty simple. You don't get simpler. Think of it. We've signed every country in the Middle East. This is like an impossible thing. It's never been done before.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by correspondent Sara Firth, who is in Washington, and managing director of This Is Dubai, Michael Jabri Pickett, who's in the studio with me. Thank you for both being here. Michael, let's start with you. OK, we've been discussing this plan since it was announced yesterday by President Donald Trump. Alongside him was Benjamin Netanyahu. But the key to all of this is we're still waiting for Hamas's response to this plan. Do you see Hamas actually thinking, OK, I agree to this proposal and to the terms in it?
I don't know that they have much of a choice. You know, there's a genocide unfolding in Gaza. They're seeing, so far, more than 65,000 Palestinians have been killed. I'm sure they're receiving pressure from the PA and from the Palestinians that they communicate with. The Qataris certainly, as well as, you know, the Turkish government, are also, I'm sure, applying pressure. There is a groundswell within the global community. So many countries, so many Western countries have recognized Palestinian statehood. If you were to have given Hamas a checklist on October 6th and say, this is what you will have achieved over the course of the next 2 years, I would think that Hamas would see a lot of victories in this list. Now, there's also a lot that they definitely would not be comfortable with. But in answer to your question, I do think that they will accept, mostly because I don't know that they have a choice.
And it's really interesting because you say the checklist is something that they'll be looking at, Hamas, and they've got no choice but to accept this. But Sara, the more and more I think about this when it comes to Hamas, it's saying that they want Hamas to lay down their arms, to leave Gaza. And there's just a lot in here when it comes to Palestinian self-determination. That's something Hamas has always said is really important to any ceasefire deal or peace proposal. Do you think they've done enough in this 20-point plan to secure that for the people?
Well, everyone watching very closely now, Leigh-Ann, to see what Hamas comes back with. We know Qatar and Egypt have put this plan to Hamas, and they've said that they are currently looking over it responsibly. But of course, you're right, there are some glaring issues here, and that is amongst these 20 points are some of those sticking points and red lines that we've seen Hamas push back on in the past. Things like laying down their arms, not having any future role in the governance of Gaza. We know that in the past that has been problematic. In the provisions, there is one of the points that say that they will have recognition of the aspiration of the Palestinian people for statehood. Now, that is obviously very different to concrete steps and a pathway towards that for the Palestinian people. But as Michael was saying there, it's a really difficult situation. I think this time, in difference to the failed negotiations we've seen in the past, you've got the support and the rallying around this announcement of the leaders of the Arab and Muslim world saying that they are supportive of this. And I think that is really a key difference to where we've seen in the past these negotiations fail and stumble. Very interestingly, at that press conference yesterday, you had the detail revealed that Netanyahu had on the phone apologized to Qatar for the strikes that they carried out on the negotiators who were there in the country at the time of the last round of negotiations, and for the death of a Qatari national. I think that is almost unheard of when it comes to Netanyahu. So there are compromises all around here. We know that Israel there's been a lot of pushback against, like, for example, even a mention of possible Palestinian statehood. But President Trump managed to get, it seems, Netanyahu on board with this. Now everyone waiting for that all-important answer, because that will really determine what happens next. And the warning from Trump was pretty clear, wasn't it? I mean, he was saying, look, if Hamas doesn't agree to this, we greenlight Israel, Netanyahu to sort of do your worst. I mean, it was a take this deal or else. And as Michael says, I don't really think Hamas are left with many options at this point.
And interestingly enough, earlier I spoke to former Labour MP Baroness Kate Hoey. I asked her if Tony Blair can be trusted by the Palestinians. Just take a listen to what she said.
A lot of surprise, perhaps, at the Arab countries who have signed up to the Trump settlement proposals haven't queried the fact that Tony Blair is involved, given his history of the Iraq War. And, when we had an inquiry into it and it proved that all sorts of things had been said that weren't true, and there was a dodgy dossier and all of that kind of thing.
And Michael, really, let's come to you about Tony Blair. So we did hear Tony Blair's name mentioned yesterday by Donald Trump. And the plan is to have this board of governance in once the transition begins. And Tony Blair will play a vital role in that transition. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, because we've seen a lot in the press today. Iraq War, 2003. Is he the right man for the job?
Tony Blair has, I think, a complicated history with the Middle East. There's the perception, perhaps, that he might have with many people in the West who might see him as the former UK Prime Minister who did great work as the US went into Iraq. On the Palestinian side and the Arab side, they see him very differently. I think what was key, though, is that we haven't heard from Hamas. Hamas hasn't been involved in this. They're not being involved in who's being a member of this board, at least not as of yet. You have Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, and those are the two people, as well as some of the Gulf leaders, who would want someone on the board that can focus on it full time, because Donald Trump, of course, is busy with many things.
But they want him to be the head of the board. Of
course they do. And of course he accepted.
Yes.
But Tony Blair is somebody that they know and that they trust. The Gulf leaders, Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, they would know and be familiar with Tony Blair, and there's a comfort factor there. And I don't think that they're too concerned with Hamas's concerns at this point.
And Sara, we speak right now about what's going to happen if Hamas is going to accept this deal. What happens next? Everyone's on tenterhooks. They're looking over this 20-point proposal, wondering and reading between the lines. But at the same time, we have to remember the people in Gaza, and we talk about a plan in place, but almost 66,000 people have already lost their lives. There's a genocide, according to one of the UN bodies, happening within Gaza City, and it's going to be very difficult to get a whole country back together with aid, with the necessary things that they need.
Yeah, it's such an important point, isn't it, Leigh-Ann? I mean, even if best case scenario here, the peace plan is agreed on by all sides and you actually see that ceasefire and an end to the fighting, the damage that has been done to Gaza and the Palestinian people will haunt, I think, an entire generation. And into the future, there are going to be so many questions asked about how we were able to get to a stage where you have the UN calling this a genocide, where you have more than 66,000 people killed, many of them children, and Gaza essentially leveled. Generations upon generations are going to be dealing with the aftermath of what's happening. And I thought it was really striking today, you know, as we're seeing the reaction from world leaders, and yes, there's a lot of support and a lot of optimism being voiced around this 20-point peace plan. You have aid workers on the ground in Gaza. You have the Palestinian people who are there on the ground talking about the ongoing targeting of civilians, about the ongoing strikes, about the ongoing starvation, hospitals seeing children being brought through the doors. So it's a stark contrast, the reality on the ground right now, and that sort of optimism that we saw being voiced at the White House and now around the world. But there is no other game in town. That's the reality of the situation at the moment. This is the best chance to silence those guns, silence the strikes, and give the Palestinian people a chance. And I think there's a real push now, particularly given that you've seen some of these leaders, you know, Turkey's Erdogan was here in Washington, D.C., just ahead of Netanyahu's visit. You saw that very, very strong camaraderie between President Trump and Turkey's Erdogan. And I think really that's the main difference this time, is that you have got that regional push now behind them. But, you know, at one point yesterday, you had Netanyahu saying, look, we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. I think given the situation and where things are at right now, you know, there is, it's been noted by multiple organizations, a genocide ongoing in Gaza. It's difficult to see how there is any harder way. But everyone now waiting with bated breath to see what the response from Hamas will be. And just interestingly, guys, one further point on the peace plan, there is a point in there that says, even if Hamas refused, there's the potential for Israel and this international stabilization force to potentially go across with some of these steps in the areas that Israel currently occupies. So question marks right now over whether there's a potential for Gaza to be partitioned, even temporarily in the future, if Hamas come back and refuse.
Yes, absolutely. That's number 17 in the plan, but that is an interesting point to outline. But, you know, we talk there, and as Sara did say, it's just a stark contrast on the ground to what's happening in the diplomatic circles. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Stay right there as we move on to another story now. When President Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth have told hundreds of top US military leaders that woke culture is officially over in the armed forces. Hegseth rolled out new gender-neutral fitness standards and relaxed some disciplinary rules, whilst Trump spoke about nuclear strength and took aim at previous commanders-in-chiefs. The surprise summit comes as global tensions rise and a government shutdown is looming. Here's some of Hegseth's speech.
Frankly, it's tiring to look out at combat formations, or really any formation, and see fat troops. Likewise, it's completely unacceptable to see fat generals and admirals in the halls of the Pentagon and leading commands around the country and the world. It's a bad look. It is bad, and it's not who we are. So whether you're an airborne ranger or a chairborne ranger, a brand new private or a 4-star general, you need to meet the height and weight standards and pass your PT test.
Sara, there we are. We see Pete Hegseth standing up on the stage, walking around. This meeting was actually intended to galvanize the troops as part of the new Department of War. You know, we heard a few words there from Pete Hegseth calling the troops telling them basically don't be fat. Did he do that? Did he galvanise them? It is what he said. Yeah.
You know, Leigh-Ann, as exercise enthusiasts ourselves, I thought, yeah, Hegseth speaking about exercise fitness and essentially calling out fat generals. I mean, it was shocking. It was a little bit surprising, although, you know, when it comes to Pete Hegseth and President Trump and their previous addresses to the military, we have seen this kind of rhetoric before. At one point, Hegseth saying when he talks about getting in shape, he's not talking about hot yoga and stretching. I don't think he's ever done hot yoga if he thinks it's easy. But look, it was a slightly strange messaging to those gathered. Many of them, you know, they were serving men and women from around the world. Many of them had travelled from abroad from their post to attend this pretty last-minute gathering. And a lot of effort going into putting something of that scale together, where you had the Secretary of Defense and then President Trump addressing the troops. Yeah, it wasn't quite that rallying the troops sort of message that you'd maybe expect. And understandably, guys, here in DC, you're already getting a little bit of a backlash from those in military circles. You've had retired generals coming out and saying, look, it's really offensive. These are some of the finest armed forces members in the world. They take an oath to serve their country, and they take that deeply seriously. And they're being criticized. And, you know, the sort of hint of an allegation that some of them might have got their promotions that they've worked and served so hard for because of diversity or DEI policies. You know, among military circles here in the Capitol, military sources I'm speaking to, that's just being dismissed, frankly, as a nonsense, although, as you can imagine, given the military, not in such polite language.
And what I find quite interesting about all of this, you know, Sara mentioned it's not hot yoga. You know, you've basically got to be a man, you've got to get into the gym, you've got to move around some weights, you've got to do your press-ups, you know, we can go on. But it was very much about the warrior ethos, this whole speech that Hegseth was giving. Is he right that to be prepared for peace, we should be prepared for war? The armed troops should be in peak physical condition? I guess you could argue.
100%. And, you know, doing a little bit of research I'm a fan of speechwriters. So I'm always curious to find out what's the inspiration for a particular part of, you know, a person's speech. And in this particular case, you know, some of what Secretary Hegseth spoke about, you can trace back to Plato and even to Roman generals in the 4th and 5th century. Certainly since the Second World War, you've had American politicians talking about the best way for us to be prepared for war, to be in a peaceful situation is also to be prepared for war. So that's not a new concept. And I know this is one of the pillars upon which the American military system is based, that you have a civilian secretary at the top. And in this case, Secretary Hegseth is a veteran. But still, the optics don't look good when you have a civilian at the top telling 4-star generals that they, as you said, don't be fat.
But you did say that he did serve, and we do know that he went on deployment to Iraq, but he wasn't top military brass. He was infantry, Pete Hegseth.
Sure.
He didn't have a huge role in the military, or he wasn't at the level of these military people. So, as Sara, you just said there, the speech hasn't gone down well because it's not rallying the troops. And then we also heard, basically, Donald Trump saying the aesthetics don't look good of some of the battleships. I mean, this isn't surely not helpful, Sara.
No, and I mean, it's not good for morale amongst the troops. That's being discussed at the moment as well. That, you know, the sort of humour of some of what was said aside, it's being seen as, certainly from the Secretary of Defence, as pretty crass, unbecoming language for someone in that role. And yeah, very corrosive to the morale of those serving men and women who were in attendance. And I think there's also, you know, again, it was President Trump, when he followed the Secretary of Defense, he sort of came out and he made a joke but saying, well, look, you know, you can relax, you can laugh. I've never heard the room so silent. But if you don't like what I'm saying, well, that's it. You can leave, and your rank will be your rank and role will be over, essentially. That's being seen by some here amongst military circles as a bit of an ideological loyalty test. It's not the sort of thing that goes down well with the serving men and women in this country. Certainly not from the top, and those sort of jokes carrying a pretty serious undertone when you consider the fact that right now here in the country there is a huge debate about presidential overreach, about the president exerting his powers into areas that should be separated. So, yeah, I mean, you can kind of see from the video and reading that room, the atmosphere wasn't perhaps what you would have expected for the kind of event that this was supposed to be, and what the message that actually got delivered to the troops was.
And
I would also say that there was a definite performative aspect to it. And I think that this was done for the American audience. I don't think you have foes overseas or for Russians who are thinking that the American military is weak or the ships don't look so good. I think this is very much in keeping with a lot of the comments that Donald Trump would have made on his campaign, during his campaign. And I think it's in keeping with the message that they want to send to Americans. And that's where I think the military members who were in attendance probably felt that they were used for less than honorable reasons.
quick question to you, short answer. Do you think this was a distraction because the government shutdown might be happening? There's lots of rumours about that online, that this was hastily organised to distract from what's been going on politically at home.
So it won't be such a quick answer, but I will say that the government, this administration, does a very good job of flooding the zone and distracting you. When something is pressing, then they'll throw something else out, which will attract people's attention. Is it something that was done purposefully? I don't know that this administration thinks that strategically, because this was a costly venture and it took a fair bit of time to organize. I don't know that in this particular case it was for a distraction.
Lots of thoughts on that online, but thank you to Sara and Michael for your thoughts there. Let's move on to another story now, and we're going to go to cricket and politics as tensions between India and Pakistan have escalated after India's Asia Cup victory. The controversy at the Games began when India refused to accept the Asia Cup trophy from the Pakistani Interior Minister and the President of the Asia Cricket Council, Mohsen Naqvi. After their victory, Prime Minister Narendra Modi posted this message on X: Operation Sindoor on the Games field. Outcome is the same. India wins. Congrats to our cricketers. Naqvi then responded by warning against dragging war into sport. He said, if war was your message of pride, history already records your humiliating defeat. Dragging war into sport only exposes desperation and disgraces the very spirit of the game. Michael, this has been quite an interesting rivalry that we're seeing playing out. We just heard there from Narendra Modi. Do you think that politics should be kept far away from the cricket pitch? And what do you make of all of this?
So in theory, it should be, but in reality, it never is. For instance, the Russian team is not allowed into the Olympics. And that's because Russia invaded Ukraine. And there you have an instance of politics playing or having an impact on sports. You can go back to the 1936 Olympics that were held in Berlin. Hitler was determined to show the world that his way forward, the Aryan race, was the true sporting example of what could be achieved. Myself, I play ice hockey, and in February of this year, you had Canada and the US playing off against each other in a couple of games. In the first game, it was just days after Donald Trump was ratcheting up the 51st states, Canada being the 51st state. And within 90 seconds of the start of that hockey game, you had 3 fights. And there was a real sense of pride, like nationalistic, patriotic pride on the Canadian side. And the idea that you could somehow separate politics from the world of sports. Yes, there is, on the playing field, I want to defeat you and you want to defeat me, but there's also the reality which talks about how if I win, then maybe my way of life is actually right and your way is wrong.
There's so much to sport, isn't there? And Sara, could we see new regulations and rules brought in to allow sport to become more separate? Or are we just way too naive to think like that?
It's very difficult. I mean, as you guys were discussing there, if you look back in history, there are moments where sporting events, despite political tensions and what's happening in the world, have been this wonderful moment for diplomacy and the chance to, put a good sporting face on, be sportsmanlike and get on and relieve the tension a little bit. Whereas in this instance, what we're seeing is, the sports field turning into a bit of a battlefield as well. We've got that saying, it's just not cricket in the UK. I don't know if that translates worldwide. But you do get a sense that there is something a bit unsportsmanlike about this, but difficult to see how regulations would potentially change. I think it's very interesting. A lot of people are pointing to the fact that this time on the field, it's played out in this way, so unsportsmanlike, some would argue, because you've got a lot of the younger generation coming in, some of the older generation who are perhaps more used to the background and the political noise and still just end up getting on with the game, carrying out those handshakes. So a difficult moment for sure. You'd hope that moving forward, they'd perhaps take the leaf out of the books where sports teams have used it as a moment to extend their hands and sort of ease tensions. One very important point though, Michael, I'm going to need to know who won in your ice hockey Canada-US game, please.
So in the first game, Canada lost, but we ended up winning the championship again against the U.S. team. And that was certainly for this year an incredible point of pride for Canadian patriotism.
Well, there we are. But I'll also say one thing. We're talking about sport and we're talking about diplomacy. And I do think sport is really great for diplomacy. We've heard it time and time again. Sports and politics are two separate things. They should never mix, but they do mix. And I always think back to the 1995 World Cup in South Africa when apartheid had ended. It was the first time South Africa held the Rugby World Cup. It was at Ellis Park. Nelson Mandela then became the President of South Africa, Francois Pienaar, of course, the captain of the South African rugby team. And that's been seen as one of the major things that solidified a change in a country, diplomatically especially, to put on a huge event like that. And I do think that we have to think about the soft power in sport. We have to think about the different countries attending these events and how sport is actually very unifying in many respects. I don't know if you agree with me, but I think it's actually one of those things that unifies a nation. It unifies people together.
It does. Traditionally, it does. I believe that. But I also think that there is an aspect to it where you have people who are. It was that way, but now it's drifted. Much like in the U.S., when you talk about Democratic and Republican politics, there doesn't seem to be a lot of common ground. And I think when it comes to the sporting community, it used to be what happened on the ice or on the playing field stayed there, and it was an opportunity for opponents to come together and to recognize their commonality. Now it seems to be just an opportunity to continue the hatred that they feel for others.
But Sara, yeah, you're absolutely right. Invictus was the name of the film made. I think it was Matt Damon who played Francois Pienaar in that. And I'm not sure if there's a poem. Did you say there's a poem?
It's the Invictus poem, I think, was presented to Nelson Mandela, or Nelson Mandela gave it to the captains of one of the team. But it's that famous, I'm the master of my fate, the captain of my fate, the master of my soul. Very interestingly, and a quick point, guys, when it comes to sports and politics, here in the US, President Trump has been making noises about potentially not allowing the World Cup to be held in cities that are deemed unsafe. So some of the democratic cities that currently are in President Trump's political firing line. So more on that. But yes, it is a difficult subject, isn't it, when it comes to sports and politics?
It's always a tricky one, but thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Now, let's move on to another story that we have. And in California, police were forced to stop a car after it performed an illegal U-turn at traffic lights. However, the San Bruno officers soon discovered it was actually a driverless Waymo vehicle. So with no human driver, no ticket could actually be issued. However, it's prompted safety concerns about the cars. Waymo have said it's looking into the situation and aims to make improvements. OK, Sara, more about driverless cars. I always feel like we hear about these. What's your take on driverless cars? Are they dangerous, or are they still so new that it's not really fair to comment as of yet?
They're still really new. I mean, they generate a lot of excitement and debate as we're having now. I don't know about you guys, but I, for one, am a passenger princess. So I'm very happy with the idea of the future of potential driverless cars. Anything for an easy life. But it is amusing that you had the police department in this instance carrying out their usual road checks. They stopped this Waymo, realised there was no driver, and had come out and said, well, they don't know what to do because they don't have a provision for issuing a ticket to a robot. So Waymo has exposed a flaw, I suppose, in the driverless car situation where, you know, they can perform these illegal U-turns and not held to the same standards as the rest of us in public. Very clever of the Waymo to have found a way around that, but certainly something that the makers are going to be scrambling now to see if they can fix. And presumably, actually, police departments will have to look at how you police this kind of thing in the future as it becomes more prominent.
Well, I know another carry-on when it comes to these driverless cars, Michael. But we're also seeing 2 US senators looking into the safety of Tesla, aren't we? And does this spell disaster for the brand? And it's all over their driverless cars too, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I don't think it does. I think for a couple of reasons. One, I think as long as Elon Musk is associated with Tesla, I think that brand will be fine. And certainly the Tesla shareholders believe in Elon Musk. I also think it's interesting that you have 2 Democratic senators who are going after or investigating Elon Musk. And I think he has a bit of a target on his back, perhaps rightly so. But one of the things, you know, that Sara mentioned being a princess or a passenger princess, I wish that I could have been a passenger prince. The amount, I've been here 22 years, the amount of money I have paid in fines during the time I have been here. The country introduced cameras, which I didn't think would be very effective. The cameras are far too effective. I've paid too much. I've lost my license. My car has been impounded. It has not been good for me. So I would 100% be in favor of a driverless car, or a driverless car where I could make sure that I wouldn't have to pay any more than what I'm actually paying for the use of the car.
Well, you know what? Then what could happen is you don't have to pay the ticket, because obviously Waymo, as Sara said, you know, couldn't get charged for the legal U-turn. But what I'm interested in is, all I hear about is driverless cars, driverless cars. But I remember watching Back to the Future when I was much younger. And I'm sorry, but it's 2025 and no one's given me a flying car. It's really disappointing, Sara. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Hugely disappointing, but weren't you guys saying there's potentially a flying car expo at some point in the near future? I think one of us has to go along and check that out, because I am totally with you, Leigh-Ann. We need technology to give us what the people want.
Yeah, flying car. I'm a little bit scared of heights, and these taxis are almost like helicopters that fly. I don't know.
So in 2026, you have Dubai will be introducing I forget what the name of the vehicle is, but they'll have helipads, and they'll be small mini helicopters that will be transporting people from Abu Dhabi to Dubai, from within the city of Dubai as well. I think they seat 4 passengers, and they will be exactly what you want. So you may be scared of heights, but at least you will be getting something that's close to a car that's flying within the city.
No, it's going to be pretty cool. I look forward to that day. And also, it's that time of the show when Michael and Sara, you've chosen two of the quirkiest stories of the day that you could find. And Michael, I'm going to start with yours because yours is absolutely fascinating. It's about a 2-year-old girl has been chosen as the new living goddess in Nepal. Tell us more.
As her father said, she was just my daughter yesterday, and now she's a living goddess. So in Nepali culture, which is Hindu and Buddhist, they have a tradition where they have a Kumari, which is Nepali for virgin, and that girl represents, well, she is a living goddess. And she is revered, and she is then, she's selected between the ages of 2 and 4, and she's then, she lives in a palace until just on the eve of puberty. When she hits puberty, she is believed to become a mortal creature. And so this new living goddess will move into the palace, and she will be sequestered there. She will have a tutor. She will have a select number of playmates. And she, to qualify, she had to have unblemished skin, unblemished hair, and teeth and eyes, and not be afraid of the dark. And another interesting piece of information is that she, as long as she is the living goddess and she's in the palace, she is not allowed to touch the ground outside the palace. She has to be carried everywhere. Now, in Nepali folklore, once a Kumari returns to mortal life, there is a belief that any man who marries her will die at a young age. So a lot of these women end up remaining unmarried. And recently, the government has introduced a minimum wage for them as kind of a pension fund of sorts, where they receive a monthly stipend so that they are able to survive as they grow older.
That's absolutely fascinating, Sara. I'm not sure what you think of that, but it is quite amazing to have a living goddess.
I know. I mean, I think, you know, as all goddesses know, you don't need a man. So that's fine. They'll be okay. But very interesting indeed. I mean, look, I'm all for young children getting goddess status, but you know, fascinating the sort of qualifications that you need for that, though. Unblemished skin, not afraid of the dark. I mean, that's pretty it's pretty intense for one so young. But yeah, that needs to be a Disney movie. I think it's a fascinating insight into Nepali folklore and brilliant find of the week, Michael.
Yeah, I love that. And as Sara said, you know, we don't need a man necessarily. But Sara, let's go into your story. There's been a very surprising family reunion in a chance encounter, and it happened at a graveside. This is absolutely fascinating. Tell us more.
It is. It's one of those stories that's about fate and serendipity. So you had these two sets of people coming to one gravesite. You had some cousins travelling from London down to Northamptonshire. They were going to visit the grave of their great-great-great-grandfather. And when they got there, they found another couple, a man and a woman who were married and had travelled from Kansas and had been planning this trip for a long time. So they get to the gravesite in Northamptonshire. They're saying, well, hi, who are you? Why are you here? They said, well, we're, you know, this is our great-great-great-grandfather. And the other couple said, likewise, it's also ours. And they realised in that moment that they were family. They've obviously been out together. They've stayed in touch. They've exchanged stories. They've said it was a 12 billion to 1 chance. If either of them had arrived half an hour later, half an hour sooner, the meeting wouldn't have happened. But a really lovely sort of family reunion story, and just one of those, 1 in a million chances, or as they say, 1 in 12 billion chance that they met in this way and now have all remained in touch and finding out they're related. Pretty incredible twist of fate.
I love that. I love reading and hearing about those sliding doors moments in life. Remember that film, Sliding Doors? I always think there's those little things that happen in life. It's divine intervention. It was just meant to be. And thanks to our guest today, correspondent Sara Firth in Washington, and also managing director of This is Dubai, Michael Jabri Pickett, who was, of course, in the studio with me. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X. G&T is coming up next with Tom Burgess Watson. Goodbye, and thank you for joining us.